Oh, no typing. Or you gotta mute yourself when typing. Here we go, everybody. I do believe we are live. Welcome to another episode of the Break the Rules live stream. I am your host, Lev Polyakov, and we are all the way live today talking about the fairy folk, talking about nymphs, imps, all that good stuff. And I am hearing my audio from somewhere. It is from my computer over here. What is going on here? Oh, it's my phone. Here, I'm going to get rid of my phone quickly.
I'm your host, Outlaw Prime. Welcome
we're taking
to
over.
the Break the Rules
All right,
podcast.
we are back, everybody.
I'm your host.
My
I've
apologies
been
for
appointed.
that. Looks like this is what happens when you do not go on live for a long time. You end up forgetting that your phone has all the data and it's currently transmitting it. Anyway, we're going to get right down to it. We got Outlaw Prime, we got Ingurdiz, and we have Aaron, aka MorbidforFun, here for the very first time. Him and Ingurdiz, Outlaw Prime, you were here back when Break the Rules was doing streams with a lot of people all at once. It was a lot of craziness, but I think a lot of those streams were good because people were inching towards this idea that there is more to life that's going on than just our material reality, and that's what we're going to be talking about here today. Outlaw Prime, just give a brief introduction about who you are, where you're from, what you're doing, and same then goes for Aaron and Ingurdiz.
The Agwiv, Outlaw Prime, Isanam Dum, is Ernok May. Hello, everyone. My name's Outlaw Prime. I'm from Ireland. I'm an Irishman. And I have some strange experiences that have shaped the way that I view the world, which I think is more of a traditional way rather than a modern way. And because of that, and some of the knowledge I have based off where I'm from, I'm going to be arguing and talking about fairies and why they're real.
Indeed. And Ingurdiz, same thing for yourself, but you are coming from England, which is usually, from what I understand, an enemy of Ireland. But I'm glad that peace was able to be made today, and you're going to be talking from the English perspective about, I don't know if they're also still called fairies or elves, but we're going to get into that as well. So a little bit about yourself, too.
Hello, yep, I'm Ingurdiz, an Englishman, Anglo-Saxon. Yeah, fairies, we call them fairies here, but pixies, gnomes, all that fun stuff. I myself have also had very strange experiences over my life, and I've accumulated knowledge and certain teachings and learned many things, and that has led to such strange experiences. So I also will be arguing for the existence of such creatures and beings today.
Now, while this isn't a debate per se, I don't know, Aaron, would you err on the side of being a little bit more critical of the existence of these beings, or how open are you to the idea that these beings exist, and do you think that we're going to be able to change your mind today, make you think a little bit differently about it?
I don't really know much about fairies, to be honest. Hold on, a text just popped up that distracted me. But from what you sent me about the whole fairies thing, I did read part of it, and it was a bit interesting. I'm not gonna lie, but like a lot of words I just didn't understand. Like I'm a horrible reader. But then after that, I found a video on YouTube by BuzzFeed talking about it, something very similar to what you were talking about. And I have an idea now. I have an idea. I don't know if I believe them or not, so I don't have an opinion yet. But maybe you guys can, get an opinion on it. So we'll see.
Let's see what happens. Yeah, so let's everybody make sure to smash that subscribe button, smash the like button. I don't know if you saw the color of my pants while I was running with the cell phone just to drop it in the center of Mount Doom over there, just to make sure that it doesn't, because you understand at that time you don't have no idea how to turn the cell phone off. So the only thing you can do is just throw it to the furthest reaches of the room. But if you know the color of my pants, make sure to write it in the chat. That's going to be question of the day. So anyway, let's start with Outlaw Prime. You give us your take on why you think fairies are real. Go.
Right, so I guess I'll give a bit of a background as to what fairies are in the Irish context. Basically, their name in Irish are the she or the ace she. And this word actually refers to burial mounds, and there are burial mounds in Ireland that are kind of ring shaped. And there's other ring forts and all that kind of thing, and they'd be referred to as fairy forts quite often because of the fact that in Irish pagan belief, and of course later after Christianization it remained, there was this idea that these spirits resided near the dead. There's another word used often to describe them in Irish called Dina Maha, which basically means the good people, the good folk. So they were kind of seen as, it was a bit of a gray area actually, even in pagan times. But of course, after we were Christianized by St. Patrick, whose day is tomorrow.
Tomorrow, yeah. What a coincidence, huh?
I know, exactly. It's a beautiful synchronicity, I believe. But they were also, they were seen as basically, these spirits that came from nature in a sense, but there's varying kind of origins, I guess, to the fairies, in particular to the Sidhe, one of which is the Tuatha Dé Danann. Now, the Tuatha Dé Danann are basically, you could say they're the gods or the pantheon of Gaelic paganism, which is a little bit of a simplification. It's a bit more complicated than that. But in the Léar Gabála Éireann, which is the Book of Invasions, the Tuatha Dé Danann are one of the many races that came to Ireland and claimed Ireland as their home. And it wasn't until the Milesians came that they were ousted and they became fairies, you could say. They became the Sidhe, which reside in the Otherworld. Now, I know I said a lot of things there, but to give a bit more kind of context to what all these words mean, Milesian refers to the Gaels that reside in Ireland now, and we came from a man named Mil España. Now, España means Spanish, basically, or Mil of Spain, and he's been Latinized to be called Milesius. He was a Scythian warrior, and this is why a lot of Gaels on Twitter and such, kind of niche areas, you'd hear them talk about the Scythian connection to Ireland, which has some strong anthropological proof behind it, although I think most modern scholars would say that it was a myth, which therefore means it's not real somehow. But essentially, Milesius was a Scythian warrior, and he had great conquests. He ended up in Egypt, and he was impressed. He impressed a pharaoh. I'm not going to try and say his name because I'll butcher it, but this pharaoh wished for Mil to be wedded to his daughter, who's Scota. Now, they went to Spain, and this is why Iberia has a great Celtic connection. This is just proven by DNA, and even the cultures of Iberia, Galicia in particular, have a lot of Celtic influence and traditions. But the Spanish, who have been our allies for a very, very long time, this was their home, is where we originally came from, because he had lots of children with Scota, and then he died in Spain. He never actually made it to Ireland, as the legend goes. But Queen Scota, with her many sons, came to Ireland, and she lifted up the banner, and she is the mother of the Gaelic race. And her grave, which I've had the honor of being able to visit, has a Egyptian obelisk, and it has some Gaelic stuff written on it too. And her grave is in Cúnta Kiri, up in a sort of a hill, which is... Yeah, I mean, I kind of went off on a tangent there. I'll let someone else talk.
It almost makes me want to go off on a tangent too, which I will not, but I do recall there being some piece of news talking about how they found that certain pharaohs had red hair in Egypt, so I wonder if there's a connection there.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's been proven recently King Tut had R1b haplogroup in him, which is surprising. You'd think it'd be R1a, but... it's clear, Indo-Europeans at the very least have a deep connection to ancient Egypt, and the Irish are one of the strongest in terms of their myths, their oral traditions, and just generally their kind of intuition points us towards Egypt, which has been a very important tradition to me, the Egyptian tradition. But regardless, Scota, who gave birth to the Gaelic race and therefore gave birth to the Milesians, they would later inherit Ireland, and they would defeat the Tuatha Dé Danann again in Cúnta Kiri on top of a mountain in a big battle. And it is said that the Tuatha Dé Danann kind of went away to the otherworld, which is basically like the astral plane, it could be said, or it could be said as the realm of the dead, which again, is why the Sidhe have this connection to the dead. And I think, we don't know much about Gaelic pagan belief. Like a lot of pagan beliefs, we don't really know truly what they believed because of the fact that a lot of it was lost and a lot of it was translated by Christian monks who, in Ireland, for the most part, actually seemed to not have meddled with it much. They were quite honest about what they actually believed. They didn't try to slander them, although some did, of course. But because of that, they can be known as the Slua na Marv, the host of the dead, or the Slua Shi, the immortal hosts. And again, these titles are really connected to the Tuatha Dé Danann, and the otherworld being this kind of place where one resides after they die, but they typically go somewhere else. Like a lot of pagan beliefs, that there's you could see it as like a house you go to, and then you kind of wait there, and then you go to the halls of the warriors or whatever,
like a Valhalla.
Exactly, yeah. There was very similar beliefs there. The ocean was very much connected to the dead in Irish paganism. There was various connections there, but the element of air is the one most closely associated with the Sidhe, which brings us on to the kind of Christian view of them, which is, Dauvna Arig, they were called, which means air demons. So it sounds kind of almost like they were being moralists, saying they're just typically evil. I think it was still, even in the Christian context, especially early Christian Ireland, they were still seen as kind of grey spirits, but fallen spirits nonetheless. You could say fallen angels, some may have believed, or, who knows, even Nephilim, who knows how they viewed them. But I mean, it's still consistent with the pagan view that the Tuatha Dé Danann kind of fell because they were defeated, but it was an honorable defeat. It wasn't like some kind of bitter thing. And the Irish, the Milesians, were said to have actually bred with Tuatha Dé Danann, which means that there are Irish humans they have fairy ancestry, which actually exists in England and in other Celtic civilizations around the world, this kind of idea. So that's a lot of things I touched on there. But
Well, there's a lot of things to explore over here, and I appreciate Outlaw. I definitely want to hear if Aaron, if you have any questions, and also if I see like a cute redheaded girl, I assume like she would be perfect in some kind of like an elven forest. So what you're saying is that that's not a mistake.
No, not at all. I think definitely Ruas, as we call them here, Ruas are, they're very magical. Whether or not that means they're literally descended from fairies, I think we can all attest to a red-haired woman being incredibly beautiful.
Indeed. So, Aaron, any thoughts so far?
It's interesting right now. Like, I'm just listening, trying to hear everyone's side to it right now. So far, it's interesting. Yeah, that's cool.
Excellent. So, Ingurdiz, you personally had an actual experience with these fairy beings. Can you tell us all about it?
Yes. Well, when it comes to fairies, from my perspective, fairies can be a catch-all term in the Western world for what I would call nature spirits, or spirits that reside in the natural world. So the difference between they're pure spirits, they're non-human. Like a human spirit would be like your classic understanding of, say, a ghost. But a spirit, as a natural spirit, is a pure being that exists wholly within an element. So nature spirits you would find be connected to elements. So like the classic humble gnome would be an earth element, and fairies or like very spectral things could be airy, an air element, and so on and so forth. Water sprites, the water element, etc. So we see that there's all these sorts of nature spirits in like northern Europe, western northern Europe, obviously especially in Ireland, but in England and Scandinavia and Iceland, with elves and fairies and gnomes and trolls, all of that, they're all kind of existing within that same realm. So my experience with kind of a nature spirit, there's been a few, but the one I want to tell is the most exciting one and the more spooky one. Is back in 2014, I used to live in Iceland, and on a hiking trip, not too far from the capital, it was kind of this hiking trail, and it's in these forests because for some context, in Iceland, there are no longer any natural forests. When the Norse migrated to Iceland, the whole island was covered with trees, and they chopped them all down, believing that they would grow back very quickly, apparently. Or it was because they were grazing animals, it affected. So when you're in Iceland now, the forests you find have been planted recently, and you can tell they're very symmetrical. You can tell that man had planted them. So I was in one of these forests, and I went to take a break. And I thought, well, okay, because we were making camp, me and my friends. So I thought, okay, I'm going to explore this forest a little bit. So I'm just kind of walking through the forest, taking it all in, and suddenly I am overcome by a sense. The vibe changed, and the only way I can describe it is like a sexual vibe. Basically, you walk into a room where two people have just been in, and you know what's happened, and obviously that caught me off guard because I'm like, why am I feeling this when I'm in some forest in the Icelandic wilderness? So anyway, curiosity kills the cat, so I keep walking, I keep going, and I'm struck by like a mental image. Now, the best way to explain it is like it was a mental image that wasn't my own. It was almost like it just came to me out of nowhere. And so what was this mental image? This mental image was of your like stereotypical, very attractive Nordic woman, blonde hair, blue eyes, fair skin. So I was young at the time. I was only a wee lad at the time. And obviously I was kind of taken by this. And I'm like, that's very strange. So I keep walking deeper into the woods, and I'm very much overcome by this image, this strong mental image of this beautiful woman in the woods. And like, I'm thinking, oh, there's this beautiful Nordic lady in the woods. She's waiting for me. She wants me. And obviously then I came to my senses and I realized, wait a minute, all of this is very messed up. None of this makes any sense. What am I doing? So I left. I did a 180 and I walked straight back to camp and tried to forget about it because it spooked me. And eventually, sometime after, I told my Icelandic friend about this. And he went, oh, yes, you encountered a huldra. And I said, what is that? And he said, well, it's like a mermaid, but in the forests. So in Scandinavian folklore, these natural spirits who look like women, the hidden folk, she'll be in the woods. She's very attractive. A man will be out in the woods, a hunter or whatever, will see this beautiful woman. She would entice him. And obviously, the stories differ. She'll either like sleep with him and then kill him, or she'll sleep with him. And when he leaves, he'll never be satisfied ever again. He would always long for her. So his life will kind of fall apart because no one will ever top that woman in the woods. So that was probably one of my first major, strangest encounters. And I got shivers down my spine when I was told the folklore behind what I believe now I did encounter. And it was a close call.
What was she wearing?
Nothing.
Yes, I knew it. I knew it. That is amazing. So, no, but here's the thing, though. You were still like a wee lad, as you said. One of the things that I hear about these fairy folk is that they don't really, they can be tricksterish, but they don't really pick on kids. Like, they would usually save their venom for some sinful adult who has done certain bad things in life. Like, that's where they would really direct their energy towards. But with children, like, I heard incidents of them protecting children even. So, is that the case or not?
Well, wee lads, I would say I was a teenager.
That's kind of a gray area then, yeah.
Yeah, it's in the middle park there, but yeah, children are normally in some folklore concerning like the fae folk and that they're normally quite protective, but in terms of like trickster spirits or beings that are a bit malevolent, sometimes there was fears of like newborn babies being replaced, changelings and things like that, and I think there's some similar things in Scandinavian folklore. But yeah.
Well, I don't want to jump around too much because now you've got me thinking about UFOs and that book and movie Communion, where there were these blue creatures that I'm trying to remember the name of those right now, but they're found inside of Appalachian mountain areas. And these are creatures that would also like kidnap children. And this guy ended up seeing these blue people along with these very traditional, gray aliens. And the whole thing just didn't make any sense. Like they were doing some weird dance in that Christopher Walken movie. So, kobolds, that's what they were called. And I don't know, kobolds, is that also something that occurs in England and Ireland? Like, I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I mean, not to go on a tangent, but yeah, alien abductions and alien encounters share a lot of like similarities with old folklore of people encountering fairies and gnomes, trolls, or what have you. There is a strong connection there. Little blue people running around. Maybe that does actually. Now that you mentioned blue, that is a connection with one of my other encounters with
Interesting.
what I believe to be a nature spirit. If you would allow me to
Absolutely.
tell that one.
Please.
It's a short one.
Please.
This was, oh God, this was probably about 5 to 6 years ago, maybe further back. And this is very local to me, a little wood near where I live. And I was walking my my dogs. And this was in the middle of the day. This probably was maybe midday. And it was in the height of spring. So in the height of spring, in this wood, obviously everything's back to life, but there's huge overgrowth surrounding the paths, and this overgrowth is at least my height, nearly 6 foot. It's very high growth, and so I'm walking, and I look to the right of me, and I notice someone in the overgrowth, and I was like, "Listen, why is someone walking through?" It just caught my attention, and so obviously I'm watching them, and it's a very small person. I'd say they were about 4 foot. And they were skipping through the brush. And obviously I was a bit surprised by this because I was like, damn, like how high could this kid jump? This growth is huge. It's nearly up to the top of my head. So I just stood there and observed. My dogs started acting a little weird too. They were just weirded out by it as well. And this figure, who I thought was a child initially, but it didn't make any sense. It looked like they were wearing a full blue bodysuit. But they had fair skin and very bright blonde hair, almost yellow. And it was just skipping through the growth. And I was kind of just shocked by it. And I was just standing there watching in awe. And it kind of disappeared behind some trees. And where it was headed was another path. So I quickly raced to this path to dispel what I had just seen, to disprove myself. It would just be some kid. I get there, and of course, there is nothing there. And for the rest of the walk through that woods, the vibe was just off. It was a real strange X-Files feeling. None of it. It was just very strange. So the blue suit, that's what reminded me there. I don't know if that was a cobalt alien, but who knows?
Well, no, that would be very different. What you said right now, it reminds me a lot of the Nordic aliens, so aliens in quotes, according to Jason Giorgiani, for example. Yeah, Buddy Baldur here in the chat. And by the way, if you want to ask questions, be sure to sneed those super chats. We got to fill those super chats back up. So Buddy Baldur says that's Pleiadian. The thing is about the Pleiadians, according to Jason Giorgiani, who I've had on 2 times already, and he talked about this, is that a lot of the people who are the witnesses of these Pleiadians, the people who really did a good job bringing them into the media landscape, a lot of those people were like legit like Nazi white supremacist people who had some of them links to these white supremacist organizations. And the idea there that Giorgiani has is that these are actually Nazis from the future who went back in time to the planet Mars, colonized that, then went over here, and they were like the creator gods who seeded humanity. Now all of this, sounds, it's a lot. It's a lot to take in, but he differentiates them from the trickster archetype that we would see with a lot of these other aliens, goblins, whatever you want to call, elves, fairies, where he attributes all of these to this spectral force that interacts with humanity, but it's not really the same as these human beings. But with the human beings, that's also like a question. Like if they seeded humanity to a certain extent, they ended up creating themselves, right? Because if the idea is that the Nazis ended up going to the future and going to the past and creating themselves, it creates a very strange, type of snake eating its own tail situation, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's the issue with just time travel as a concept anyway. Watch any time travel film or literature. You're always
Yeah.
going to run into weird problems like that. Um, I'm familiar with those ideas. Do I believe them? I don't know. Probably not. The idea that Nazis went into the future and came back and colonized Mars, and then I don't know.
But what?
That's too crazy for me.
But as far as I mean, you never know. But as far as taking a step back and saying, okay, is there any way that we can separate certain beings that we end up seeing as being part of this tricksterish entity or various tricksterish entities, or something more akin to human beings from other planets that visit us, because what you said right now, it's very difficult for me to know what to place that in, because a lot of the interactions that people have had with these Nordic aliens in the blue jumpsuits seem to be more akin to meeting other human beings, albeit advanced human beings, as opposed to something a little bit goofier. But I don't know, like, where do you guys stand on that?
Well, I think in terms of Nordic aliens, Pleiadians, Greys, things of that nature. I believe I'm not sure if they're physical beings from space, from a faraway planet. I think that they are spiritual in nature, occult, esoteric, whatever, paranormal, I guess. I think that's more of what they are, because the big thing that points me towards that conclusion is how similar, say, an alien abduction encounter is to demonic attacks. It's pretty much, for most of the part, it's the same. It's the same thing. The person is frozen, they're paralyzed, they can't move, the dark shapes are around them, they're doing something to them. There is also the added element, in a lot of cases, of there being a sexual element to it. With alien abductions, people have claimed that women have claimed their eggs have been taken, or the men, their semen has been extracted. Similar to old tales of demons attacking people in the night, succubuses, incubi, stuff like that. It all rings very similar. Now, the question becomes then, why do they appear that way now and didn't back then? Why didn't people in the medieval times describe grey aliens? I don't know. Maybe it's a newer, anything's possible at that point. If you want to come to why that is, it could be anything. I don't fully know why, but there's a connection with the whole alien thing. But I don't, as I stand now, I don't think, be it Nordic aliens, grey aliens, whatever, little green men, I don't think they're from space. I don't think they're from other planets. I think they're from here, from this world, the spiritual world that exists alongside, above, and below this world we live in. They're spiritual beings that are that are around us. They affect us. They affect the world around us in numerous ways, and a lot of the time, it is in a negative way, a trickster way, or hostile in many cases. That's kind of my stance on it.
And Aaron, do you agree with Ingurdiz, or do you think? I mean, again, these are very deep questions that I don't think we'll be able to answer all in one go. But what do you lean on more, Aaron? Do you lean on these being aliens from outer space, or creatures that inhabit the same planet, albeit a different dimension?
I don't really know. The story is very fascinating. It's from both of you two. I don't. I mean, I don't have an opinion on it just yet. I believe the stories, of course, that you guys were talking about. But what are they specifically? I don't know.
Well, there's a transitionary phase that Outlaw Prime you kind of talked about, where you talked about these high beings becoming as gods later on to the people who then end up worshiping them. But it almost sounds like, if we can imagine for a second the idea of Atlantis, the idea that there were these beings who had a high degree of technology, a high degree of know-how, who then ended up having a cataclysmic event. Some survived, some did not, and those who did survive kind of ended up passing on their genes and their knowledge to the next generation. But for those people to then be considered gods, like the ancestors of those people, that would either mean that people end up being worshipped as a god, like let's say Gautama Buddha becoming enlightened and then being worshipped later on, and two things could happen there. Either Gautama Buddha was just a dude who's now dead, never coming back, totally materialistic atheist worldview over here, never coming back, never interacting with anybody, and people just remember the guy and worship him, and nothing really happens. Another version would be Gautama Buddha has now transcended this dimension, and at the same time is able to have interactions with people as this spectral entity. So when you are praying to a particular Buddha, you are able to access that particular deity who before was not a deity and now is one. So those are two ways of looking at that kind of transition between the people who were humans who now become gods. Would you say that's an accurate way of looking at things? Am I missing anything here? Let me know.
Yeah, that is very interesting. I mean, I've heard a lot of people, I forget the term for it, but in the pagan community, there's like a term for this idea that the gods were merely ancestors that had become venerated. And I think there's truth in it for sure, but I do think there is something higher than that, because if you look at Celtic paganism, I think a lot of Proto-Indo-European cultures were like this, but funnily enough, they didn't really depict the gods the same way. Like they didn't make like icons of gods or whatever. They made depictions of them for sure, but they generally tended to just talk about them because of the fact that they're kind of above, they're above like materialization. Like you can't like materially depict them properly. It can only be symbolic. And, I think this is where perennialism, the traditionalism of Gainan and Evola, of course, comes in very handy, because we have in Ireland numerous gods, and there's actually a statue somewhere with the three faces of the three Irish gods, which would be very similar to the idea of like Shiva,
Brahma, Vishnu,
Brahma, and like the triskel, of course, which is inscribed in numerous religious sites of old Irish paganism. Like it kind of represents this like this kind of perennial idea of how gods work, etc. So for that reason, I think, at least in the Irish perspective, these that were spoke of are similar to the gods of the rest of the world. They weren't particularly like men that turned into gods, but that's my response to that. I think it's very much like all religions most religions don't call their gods, they don't see it that way. Like their gods aren't men that turned into a god or whatever, That would be more like a saint.
Well, the gods are certain abstract ideas, just like we talked about with Vishnu, Brahma, and Shiva. That trinity has to do with Shiva being destruction, Vishnu being balance, and Brahma being creation. And same thing with various other gods that represent the changing of the seasons and fertility and so on. Like these are abstract concepts that are turned into a spectral being that somebody could worship. The question is whether or not it's a receptive thing, whether or not this being that represents this abstract principle can actually interact with the human being, whether they're embodied to a certain extent, or if it's just like this abstract principle that is only like a point of focus for the meditator or for the worshiper. Like I don't know where exactly the actual humanity, as it were, of the god is able to manifest, if it manifests at all.
Yeah, I think it manifests within the humans themselves that worship, because if you think about it, you said, how can it interact with us? Well, if it is true that these gods represent destruction, creation, preservation, the cycles, mean, these things all deeply influence us. You often have people say astrology is bullshit or whatever, right? And that's because they had some kind of Scorpio girl with bangs fucking break their heart or whatever. So they're like, oh, astrology isn't real. But the thing is, at the same time, they'd be just as quick to say, oh, that guy's a lunatic, usually referring to the astrologer. But lunatic comes from Luna, the moon. And it's the idea that the moon makes people mad. And we have these things like, the full moon affects human beings the same way that, the moon affects the water. I'm not a globe head or anything, so I don't I'm not going to get too much into gravity, the theory of gravity, that is. But these ideas, like, these absolutely affect us. And you could say, oh, well, that's just nature, but it is kind of higher than nature in a lot of ways, because there's some things that we just don't understand as well as ancient people did. Because again, if you were to be a materialist, a scientist, I call these people that have a certain kind of rational view of the world. You can go into ancient times and you see, the Socratic rationalists, the pre-Socratic rationalists, that's where it comes from. And at that time, they had other people, Platonists, etc., that would criticize them, and they believe there's the two worlds or whatever. Again, I'm simplifying this stuff a lot, but I don't want to give some kind of big, huge tangent. But regardless, they'll have these beliefs about how things are, like we understand them better, and the ancient people were just like misguided, and the reason that they had gods is because they couldn't just understand things in a scientific way. But I mean, all this science comes from those people. They just didn't see the science as the end of it. They saw human rationality as having a limit, which it certainly does, and they saw other things as being boundless and outside of those limits, like the Platonic ideal. They saw these kind of higher beings, and I think that's a better way to look at it, because of course you often hear, like neckbeards, whatever, saying, oh, God is a man in the clouds with a beard. It's kind of funny because
Milady.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny because like that's the same way a lot of people see these kind of ancient cultures, beings. There's some absolutely awful art, in particular of the Irish and Celtic gods, because there's so few depictions of them, by us for a reason. But there's these drawings of like if you look up Cuchulainn, you don't even see like drawings of Cuchulainn. You see like anime drawings of him or something, or it's kind of a bad example, but you see like really poor CGI. But that's because like the modern mind is like trying to humanize everything, which is a very unhuman thing to do. Like we've always believed in outside forces, higher forces. It's just now we think that we can like see them. I guess it's like in the idea of the stars are like these. The modern idea of the stars compared to the ancient idea that it was like divine light coming through the firmament. It kind of shows like the ancient, ironically enough, have a better understanding of what those are, whereas the modern man thinks that they're like these things in the sky that CGI composites of them are like real. Like, oh, I've seen pictures of the sun. No one has ever seen a picture of the sun. They've seen a picture of CGI composites, and that's not a conspiracy theory. That's
Wait,
that's
now
fact.
hold on a second. Are you telling me that the satellite footage that shows up on our computers when we search for images of the sun, that's not real? Like when a satellite photographs the sun in all these various, the sun rotating in all these various frequencies, you're saying that is also a CGI composite. That's not like the satellite that's staring at the sun being able to take that footage.
Well, perhaps. I mean, I don't know for certain if my position is right, but I definitely do know that there's holes in the other position. But like, just so I'm clear, the images of the sun as we see them, like the really high quality ball of flame in the sky, those are composites, and that's like something that NASA themselves say. The people who make those composites say, and their reason for it is because it's like not possible to properly take a high quality photo of the sun or whatever from that angle, from close up or whatever, you know what I mean, zoomed in. But my point is more so, it's kind of more of like a metaphor, seeing the sun and like understanding it and understanding these forces. It's funny because when people think that they do that, they don't. And then ancient people understood that they didn't see it or understand it fully, so they rightfully attributed it to the transcendent, which it certainly is. But again, what I'm saying is like the science behind these things are certainly correct in a lot of ways, but it's not. That's not all there is to it. The spiritual dimension can't be ignored.
Well, I think the spiritual dimension, if it does exist, has been ignored by a lot of people, and this may have started with the scientific revolution, or with Descartes. I can't say his name properly. Descartes, who saw there being a human being with a consciousness, and that is the subjective experience of an objective reality that's outside of the human being. But the problem there is now you've taken all the spirit out of the world, and the world becomes a dead world, and the only thing that's alive ends up becoming human beings. I mean, at that time, they even looked at all the, like the poor animals. They started seeing them as just like these mechanical robot things, that work like a clock, just because at that time, like around the Newton's time, that was when a lot of those mechanical devices started to become all the rage. And now people see existence as being, like a product of artificial intelligence and, simulation and ones and zeros and all that. So every generation seems to have its own way of perceiving reality. But when it comes to this separation of the spiritual aspects from how we perceive the world, I think it does have an effect on the world itself. Like, I think that the way that you see the world does change whether or not you can perceive there to be something important with the sun or with the moon or with any of these astrological bodies, as opposed to just being chemicals and gases up in the sky, which I think a lot of people see them as, and as a result of which, altogether, maybe we have a problem trying to see something beyond just them being a bunch of gases. I don't know. Like, what do you guys think of that? And also, Aaron, you haven't spoken in a while. Any thoughts on that? And I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you ever have like any thoughts on anything that we're talking about, please feel free.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm just like listening right now, like the whole CGI thing, the sun. That was actually pretty fascinating. I did not know about that. That was like interesting.
Yeah, like you hear flat earthers bring it up a lot, and it's kind of that's because they're trying to debate the idea, what we have. But what I find important about criticizing the kind of preconceptions we have that we just take for granted, we presume are true, especially about space and all these things. It's important because what comes with it isn't just you saying the sun is a bunch of chemicals, blah, blah, blah. It comes from, it comes with this cosmology, and a cosmology completely affects how you live and how you view the world as a person. It completely shapes the way you see reality. So if you believe you're in, you're spinning on a rock in space in the middle of nowhere, and all these things are just gases and farts in the sky and fucking all this stuff, you end up having a very, like, in the true sense of the word, nihilistic worldview. And that's why it's depressing. I mean, and that's not why it's not true, like, of course we have to just accept what's true and what isn't, but that's why we aren't miles ahead in progress of the ancient people. We don't even understand how the pyramids were built, I guess you could say, but even how they were placed at the perfect point. You have these coordinates of where the pyramids were, and they're like perfectly at the what's it called, pi, is that it? I'm not a big maths guy, but there's something about that there that's like crazy, that we don't understand. And same thing with in Ireland we have stone. You have the oh my god, I cannot believe that I've forgotten the name of this. Greenhenge. And we have, like, as the solar eclipse comes and as the sun comes up, it perfectly passes through in the cycle through the tunnel. These kind of things are like, not created by ignorant people. It was created by people with great wisdom, and those people believed in God. They believed in gods, in spirits. And, to this day, I mean, in rural Ireland, almost everyone believes in fairies. Almost everyone. There's Danny Healy-Rae, a mighty politician in Ireland, an advocate for bringing back drink driving and other such things. He once blamed he wasn't able to show up somewhere, and he said it was because of fairies. Like, he said it was technical gremlins. Like, but it's funny because actually I can't think of where it is now in Ireland, but there's this construction going on in this place, and it's well known, especially in rural communities, that you don't ever, a farmer, for example, would never plow through a fairy fort. They'd never disturb the fairies, because what comes with that, there's stories of people being dragged out of their bed in the night by the little people. Again, that's something common with Ingurdiz experience. They're known as little people. She oig something. I'll have to recheck that. But little people, anyways, regardless, drag you out in the night, kill you because you fucking did that. And I actually know firsthand account of a fella that did something, but I'll say that afterwards. But regardless, there's construction going on, and there's a fairy tree. A hawthorn tree is very associated with fairies, blackthorn and hawthorn. And what did they do? Only they were trying to build a road through this like fairy grounds. And the reason it hadn't been built for so long is because of people said, things will go wrong. Sure enough, it's 2010-ish, and they're trying to build it, and they have basically had to give up because so much shit kept going wrong. People would crash on the way there, machinery would break down, lots of money would be lost in the whole thing. And it's just it's a funny thing, because it's like, is that really a coincidence, or is there truth in the idea that you shouldn't go through these places? Like, even if it's a mimetic thing, I don't think it is. I think it's spiritual, but even if it's mimetic, the thought that you're kind of doing something that you shouldn't be doing might be enough. But thought itself could be said to reside in this kind of dimension, spiritual dimension. But just the point about my friend who's a farmer, they never plowed through fairy forts, of course, because of the belief that something bad would happen to you. But they did. One day, his father said, fuck it, like, I'm just going to do it, did it. And what happened was, all of their cattle, they were raising sucklers, and you dehorn your cattle, so you cut the horns off them. And sometimes the horns kind of grow back a little bit malformed, and it like hurts the cow, and it's not a good thing. But it often is like maybe one in the whole herd of cattle or whatever. But what happened this time after the whole thing was every single cow had its horns grow back, and it was twisted and malformed, and it was like digging into their skulls and hurting them. And it was that's a huge problem, that they had to solve. And after that, needless to say, they didn't kind of scoff at the idea anymore. And I can be sure his neighbors probably just told him, like, what were you doing even doing that in the first place? Like, but.
So I guess these fairies are not necessarily like animal-friendly creatures like some people may imagine. Like a cow,
Oh, no.
Fuck cows. They don't care.
No, they're not Tinkerbells at all. I mean, they have no problem eating children. The changeling thing is interesting. I recall once studying Gaelic folklore, I recall a story, and I can't remember most of it now, but I remember what it was is, if you suspect your child is a changeling, what you do is you put him on a shovel at the front door of the house, and you spin around 3 times, something like that, and then you throw him, you throw the child off the shovel out the front door onto the ground. And if the child hits the ground and dies or something, then it was a changeling. If it didn't, then it's a human child. It's kind of a funny one, but a lot of these fairy stories, I'll read one later, not to keep going on, but a lot of these fairy stories have actual real wisdom in them that can be applied even like to the rational sciences and medicine. That one is a bit of a crazy one now.
Well, I'm glad it's not the other way around like they do with a lot of the witch trials where, if the lady drowns, then she was not a witch. And then,
that's the see, this is the difference between the Catholic and the Protestant way of doing things.
By the way, in the book Daimonic Reality by Patrick Harper, it's also described, the fairies are also described like this. The fairies we have just been discussing, she calls the good people, like you were saying before, who are, quote, tall, beautiful beings, as tall as ourselves. They are distinct from, on the one hand, the gods, quote, who are really the Tuana de Danann and taller than ourselves. and on the other from the little people, who are quite good looking and naturally very small. These in turn are separate from the gnomes and leprechauns. The gnomes she saw on the side of Ben Bulben, a well-known Sligo what are these words? A well-known Sligo mountain, had rather round heads, dark, thick-set bodies, and stood about 2.5 feet tall. She called them earth spirits. Leprechauns are also small and full of mischief. She followed one from the town of Wicklow out to the Caraig Seathay Rock of the Fairies, where he disappeared. Thank you. He had a very merry face and beckoned me with his finger. Yeah, so there's like all kinds of different varieties here. Personally, I'm interested in what's going on with these tall, almost Valkyrie-like beings that are also described here. Because you were talking before about the people who inhabited Ireland, how they became, worshipped as the gods. But you were also saying that it's not really usual for there to be like this worship of regular people who became gods. Those would usually be considered saints. So would you say then that these godlike beings have always been spectral beings from the start then?
Yeah, very interesting, and I have a good answer for it. So before I'll answer that question first. So the Tuatha Danann are often described as coming from the north, which would basically imply Hyperborea. So as we know, Hyperboreans or whatever, they're kind of, you could say like demigods or gods, like lowercase g, of course. But there's no God. But you have the Tuatha Danann come over. They were always seen as like divine beings, not in the sense that they're like completely transcendental, like the one true God, but they were like a race of beings that were they were transcendental compared to a human, and they also, of course, because of the fact that they fought the Milesians in physical combat, they had an arm in the physical world and in the spiritual world, and so too do humans, of course. We can't forget that. But the Tuatha Danann, of course, are essentially, them being taller is kind of almost like a metaphor for them being greater, and I guess you could see, which is why I said it was only an interpretation, the Tuatha Danann becoming the Aes She. Now, saying that she means fairy can be a little confusing because of the fact that she brought up, the woman you mentioned earlier, or was it a woman, or was I just imagining that? I don't know.
Oh yeah, it was let's see the name over here. I'm trying to see, by an informant of Evans Wentz.
Okay.
What is that? She is described as a cultured Irish woman now, 1910, living in Dublin, County Dublin.
Excellent. So that lady brought up the she as being separate from both the Tuatha Danann and the little people, which is why I said there's a nuance in terms of the fairies. Like, I'd just say, to make things less complicated, I'd say she referring to fairies, and that would include whatever happened with the Tuatha Danann, but it would also include like leprechauns and stuff, which, funnily enough, like in Irish folklore, you don't often hear stories about leprechauns. They're kind of just one of the small trickster spirits, but they basically reside in someone's home, and they often go into the brewery or the because they like to drink or something like that.
Do they also have Lucky Charms?
Oh yeah, they've top of the morning and all that. Like, but they come in and they basically like stay in your house. But it's an interesting twist, because you think, oh, like a trickster spirit entering my house, like this is going to just be bad news. It not necessarily is. If you treat them well, like the only really way to get rid of them is to treat them well as a good host, because Ireland is the land of 1,000 welcomes. It's similar to the Norse myth. I forget the name of it. I'm sure Ingurdiz knows, but they talk about like the virtues of being a Norseman. You have to respect someone because they could be Odin coming to your house or whatever. So regardless, they come over, you'll be a good guest and it'll be grand. But also, they can be very annoying, loud rackets, stuff like that. And if you were to come into like conflict with them, they give you riddles, and if you answered the riddles wrong, they'd kill you. But it's like these double riddles, that like you can't really answer them correctly. But the solution in the story I heard was this fella, he had the leprechaun, he gave him this riddle, which I can't remember. He answered it, and the riddle, he somehow answered it wrong, even though it was like the perfect answer. And then what he did was he did the sign of the cross, and that was it. That broke it. And that shows, we're getting into something kind of deeper here, but it shows the view of like how Christianity affected Ireland. It's like now we're not really subject so much to these forces. We don't have to play their game so much because we have Christ to intercede for us. And that's why Ingurdiz said demonic encounters are often very parallel with with alien encounters or whatever, because of the fact that, like in a demonic possession case, you can have an exorcist who would be like the mediator, but it would be Christ fighting it for you rather than you using your own magic against it, which you can still do, but I recommend Christ. But that's just my own perspective. But regardless, I went on a tangent there, but I want to actually just mention the leprechauns as well. The reason that they're so like poignant in America, like they were really obsessed about in America before it became this like thing to call Irish people like some stupid kind of remark. But it used to be like a fascination among kind of Anglo-Americans. And why is it that fairies and even encounters with fairies and leprechauns, little people, all these things happen in America? I believe this is because of course, the vast amount of Irish Americans who carried with them on the coffin ships during the Gorta Mór, the Great Famine, the genocide. When we were coming across on the coffin ships, there was a lot of dead, and there was a lot of Irish people who perhaps had the blood of the Tuatha Dé Danann flowing in them, like I mentioned before. And also, like I mentioned before, the dead being associated, of course, with the fairies. So for that reason, I think fairies are in America, Irish fairies, and I think the Irish solutions still work. So should you ever come across them, if you're an American, definitely still listen to these things, because you never know, you might have to solve some riddle or something, But yeah.
So it's very interesting that you said this, because one of the things I want to talk about was also Christianity's, and with St. Patrick's Day coming up tomorrow, St. Patrick's weaponry against the snakes, which is weird because there were no snakes as far as a native species goes in Ireland. So I take snakes to be a metaphor. Personally, just like shot in the dark, I think snake has been for a long time, the snake power, that's the kundalini energy in people's spines, and that's also been associated with spiritual progression, in all kinds of directions. I'm not saying necessarily all positive here, but it could be that these snake energy beings were driven out by Christianity. And it says over here, Chaucer's Wife of Bath from Canterbury Tales gives an ironical but unwittingly chilling description of how fairies were scoured from the landscape. In the old days, she says, the land was full of fairies, but now no one sees elves anymore. The reason for this is the activity of holy friars and, quote, limitors, friars who were granted a license to beg within certain prescribed limits. Quote, as thick as motes in the sunbeam, these holy men went about blessing everything from halls, kitchens, and bowers to cities, burgs, and castles, to woods, streams, and dairies, that maketh there been no fairies. For wherever there used to walk an elf, there now walks none but the limitor himself.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Certainly, Christianity in Ireland is wholly unique compared to how it came about in other countries. For example, the peaceful conversion of the Gaels is basically something not seen in most nations that underwent Christianization. A lot of Druids didn't just convert to Catholicism, they would instantly be promoted to bishops or archbishops even, because of
What
the
a
fact
deal.
yeah, exactly. But also, it was because they were recognized. They weren't seen as like evil sorcerers. They were recognized as people with power and people that worship the true God, even. For example, there's the god which has been often attributed to be like the Irish Odin. His name is Lug Lávada, Lug of the long arm.
You cut out there for a second, Outlaw Prime. Are you
by
with
the
us? There
Gales
we go.
when Patrick came over, St. Patrick, and he said, oh, he talked to them about logos, you know. They said, oh, logos, you know, we can see this connection here. And that's what I mean by the perennialism as well. But the druidic faith, which is kind of an oxymoron because of course it was so different in every province, every village, but there seems to have been this kind of almost near understanding of Christianity. They almost arrived at Christ already, which has been said of the Buddhists as well. I believe the first mention of Gautama Buddha in the Orient, in the West was by a saint. I can't remember his name now, but he basically said, he said Buddha was a very holy man and that they basically discovered Christ. And likewise, you have the holy pagans, you know, you have Origen and these others who, you know, I guess they're technically considered heretics or whatever, but they kind of almost arrived at it. But yeah, the Christianization of the Gaels was quite a peaceful one, and there are, of course, tales of St. Patrick himself doing magical duels with druids and others, like sorcerers, basically. And these duels are really fascinating because they're very similar to Moses and his encounters with the magicians of Egypt, and using his magic was like greater than theirs, you know what I mean? Like they had to prove themselves. It wasn't simply them coming over and just reading Christian text to them. They had to like prove that
Uh-oh, SpaghettiOs, here we go. Don't
sorcery
worry.
or whatever.
Oh, you're back now. For some reason, you were gone just for a second there. I think there's like some kind of an instability going on with your camera.
Oopsie.
But no worries. No worries. You are back in business here, Outlaw Prime, but your avatar is missing. But that is very interesting when it comes to how the Christian powers were stronger than the local powers of the Druids and all that. But it still makes me think about what exactly are these particular Christian powers in comparison? Because take the Virgin Mary, for instance. The same book that I was telling you about, Daimonic Reality by Patrick Harper, in it talks about how certain sites that were pagan in origin, like certain springs, for example, where certain fertility goddesses would come in. And this, you know, all around the world, that this was in South America as well as in Ireland, where these entities would be seen before as these local pagan goddesses, and then they were seen as the Virgin Mary. But they were still like the same entity, and in fact, around the beginning for certain instances, those goddesses didn't really call themselves the Virgin Mary, but they were assumed to be the Virgin Mary, and later on they called themselves the Virgin Mary. They kind of started to get with the program here. So when I see this, I see a much more flexible picture rather than saying, well, these are all mistaken entities, you know, and these are like, these are LARPers. If these are Virgin Marys, as it were, or pretend Virgin Marys, that people nevertheless had a lot of faith in and who participated in healing and all that, where does the real Virgin Mary start as opposed to the fake Virgin Mary, and is there even a difference there?
Yeah, that's very interesting. You mentioned the streams. The Tuatha De Danann actually means like the children of Danu, who we don't know much about really, but Danu was basically seen as like the mother of the Tuatha, of course, because that's literally what it means. But, you know, she was a very, you could say, Marian figure, or Venusian or whatever. But I think the Virgin Mary, we're getting into like kind of deep theology here, but the Virgin Mary could be seen as like the prima materia, you know, not necessarily just a saint, because of course, Christ, you know, God manifest as holy man and holy God manifested within the womb or the furnace of Mary, and she was the Immaculate Conception. She was born without sin, without stain. So of course, she is already she's like elevated above all humans, and even the angels themselves bowed to her. Now that's important because they said, you know, Hail Mary, full of grace. To say hail to someone is implying that they're above you. The the humans in Christianity too are supposed to be above the angels once they'd reached salvation, because we're meant to basically become God. That's what Saint Augustine would have said. And it's sometimes called deism, which is kind of misattribution. But regardless, the idea that Mary was above these angels implies that Mary herself has this transcendental quality, which likewise would mean the submission of the gods. Because it's very easy to just say that all of the pagan gods were demons, and that only, like even in the Old Testament, they say, the gods of the Gentiles, they worship demons. It's very easy to just say that, but in reality, like you said, if there's these healing powers, there's these synchronization that kind of effortlessly enough happens, it would imply that perhaps they could be seen as
Silence. The fairies are out to get poor Outlaw Prime, and we need this information. But luckily we have Ingurdiz to fill in any of the details here. So Ingurdiz, while Outlaw Prime is figuring out whatever is going on with his internet connection, feel free, come in and let us know what you think about the conversation so far.
Well, I pretty much agree with everything. It's essentially to kind of continue what he was saying. So in terms of Christianity kind of overtaking paganism, or the pre-Christian thought of the time, from my perspective, and probably Outlaw Prime's as well, if I can speak for him, Christianity is the truth. Christ is the God-man. He is the manifestation of God on earth. He is holy God and holy man as one. It is the uniting of heaven and earth. It's united as in Christ. So with Mary, the Virgin Mary, she is literally the throne of God. God, as a man, as a baby, when he was incarnate, sat on the lap of the Virgin Mary. She is the literal throne. He grew in her womb and he fed from her breast. She is the literal throne of God. So a figure like that is incredibly important in the spiritual hierarchy.
Well, it's almost like the Black Madonna, if you know about like the Black Madonna statues and all that, where the blackness symbolizes the blackness of almost like non-existence from which existence springs forth. I don't know if that's a good analogy for this or not. Let me know.
Yeah, no, essentially, yeah, that it can be seen as that way. And also she's almost like a blueprint or a precursor to what we can follow to ascend and transcend to the Godhead, where it's like, to find through Mary to Christ, and from Christ, of course, we find God. So we want to emulate that figure. And on the point of that, Outlaw said earlier about, the angels would bow before the Virgin Mary as well. You could see the angels, these spiritual beings, and you could almost, if you had to have kind of a hierarchy, a ladder, gods, lowercase g, let us not forget, could be considered on that level too. Higher beings, spiritual beings that were there at the beginning before man, they bow before God, and of course his mother. So these beings, there is one God, and when we say one God, that is the big guy upstairs, the beginning and the end, the creator.
The big guy from the Hunter emails.
Right, the tall guy, that he's there at the top, the big boss, I like to call him. That's the one. That's everything. Nothing and everything all at once. Everything springs forth from that. And so all the gods and angels and spirits and demons, everything all comes forth from him. It's all part of creation. Now, because he is the creator, all are, as it has been said, bow before him. So that's why we see instances of when people encounter spiritual beings, say like fairies or what have you, people do the sign of the cross or say a prayer, they're repelled because they are subservient to God. It is the creator. So that's why I think Christianity managed to blend pagan faiths into it and kind of absorb them, because I believe that Christianity is the completion of religion. Christianity completes religion, because it is I mean, you could argue that it could be kind of a cop out to just say, oh well, yeah, our God created your God, but maybe he did. It could be that simple.
I gotta
you know,
get Gnostic Informant in here, because he was formerly Christian, but he has studied Christianity extensively, and just from the perspective of being able to, not really saying like bloodheads in a blood sports type way, but to have someone with a little bit more history in here to be able to see like what exactly transpired during that time of Christianity forming, what may be certain pieces that were missing, because when it comes to this, like what Christians lead into, I think, is good as far as respecting, doing good by others. I think these are all great qualities. The one thing that makes me a bit suspect, as far as whether it's like the truth that everything was leading up to or not, has to specifically do with, for example, you could say, a more materialistic scientific way of looking at the universe, at least being able to reach out and see all these galaxies and planets and things like that and think like, man, there's a lot out there. So it doesn't mean that we're not special, but it definitely makes me think that we're a bit like a tribe that's living in an island somewhere and only really knows that island and knows the sea that's around us and nothing else. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's why when it comes to figuring out what exactly this whole experience is all about, I think that the experiences that we have, whether it's like these experiences that Christians have during intense meditation and prayer, I never want to take away from the power that contains. I just don't know whether or not that power is something that's connected with what may have happened a thousand years ago in in the vicinity of Bethlehem and Jerusalem and all that. Like, that's a harder pill for me to swallow. I don't know, like, and again, I'm not saying that it cannot be that way either, but I don't know, Morbid, like, you grew up in a Christian household, right?
Catholic.
There we go. Yeah, so just like Outlaw Prime and Ingurdiz, are you also of the Catholic persuasion?
I am Catholic, but I'm a convert. I converted a few years ago.
And the only thing I have going for me here is that I went to Catholic school. So there's
really?
that. Yeah, I went to
That's
this
interesting.
on this school, Our Lady of Grace. So I had like the whole experience with, going to the confession and waiting in line for the bread and all that. So, I did get a sense of community that people had there, but it was also something that back then, when you start to, again, like look at the entire universe here and think like, is this it? Like, is this planet and the people that are on it the only thing that actually matters? Or in a galaxy that's further away from us, are there also instances taking place of people having similar strife and similar things that they have to work on? And would they not also have a Jesus-like figure that would go to them? Like, there's always those thoughts that start occurring. So I don't know, like, what do you guys make of the vastness of the universe and all that in relation to Christianity, as well as whatever other things may occur there?
I have an answer. So the question, okay, the vastness of the universe, is there other life out there? Big question. As I see it in terms of that, because I think it's possible, but as of now, as we understand and how we observe the universe that we can see, we haven't seen anything out there. So at the moment, it's kind of like, we don't know. It's possible. It's a big place. I believe if there is life out there, I believe what we would find is life that could be compared to the animal. So I don't think we'll find anything that's comparable to us or beyond us. I think we will find Earth-like planets, or planets that are not like the Earth, work in a different way, with life forms, complex life forms that could be compared to animal life here. So the way I would see it is, even if there is intelligent alien life out there, if we look at it as being a chain of being, so obviously right at the top, you'd have the big guy himself, God. And then you go downwards, God, angel, and then humanity right in the middle, and then below us, animals, vegetation, minerals, and so on and so forth. Where would aliens fit on that chain of being. And I would say that they fit on the animal level, even if they exhibit intelligence comparable to us or even above us. They could still be considered animal because, one, they would be material beings. Now, why would they be on the level of animal on this part of this chain of being? Because they may well not have sin. They didn't fall. We have been told from what we have that the garden, original man, Adam and Eve, fell. And that was the creation of original sin, separate us from God. Animals don't have original sin. Animals are innocent. They can't go to hell. Do they go to heaven? That's a whole other question.
All dogs go to heaven. Yeah,
all dogs go to heaven. So they would be, to me, the same as an animal. They would be innocent. Their souls, if you would, haven't been tainted by original sin. So there would be no need for them to be reconciled with God through Christ, to be redeemed for repentance, because they didn't fall. We did. And that's why we have to go through the process of repentance and transcending and stuff.
But why do you think they didn't fall? Why do you think that the aliens didn't fall?
Well, to base it on simply, God didn't tell us about them. So, I want to be fair to this worldview, but it does also sound a bit like the tribesmen living in an island saying, "Well, our God didn't tell us that there are all these other humans that exist, so we're going to look at them as just being like these monsters that invaded all of a sudden." Well, then you can argue, I suppose, say we did encounter these aliens and they are intelligent. Maybe they need saving too. Maybe we need to baptize the aliens.
And again, like when it comes to baptism, I'm not looking at this as being something that's not going to work, just so you understand what I'm talking about here. Like, I do see there being a reality where a lot of the things that draw people in closer towards loving one's neighbors, towards turning the other cheek, towards doing things that would be that of a true Christian. I see these things as being beautiful. I see these things as being incredibly important for humanity to stop fighting with each other if we can get on the same page as far as what can we do to live in a world where we're not going to have to be afraid of our neighbor, taking our stuff just because they feel like it. Basic things like that. But when it comes to who exactly it was that we learn about, when it comes to going all the way back to Judaism, going to Yahweh, when it comes to this figure who had these tests, if you will, like with, for example, Abraham sacrificing Isaac. If we're talking about the storming of the city of, I don't remember the name of it right now, it's going to come to me.
Sodom and Gomorrah.
Well, Sodom and Gomorrah too, but after Sodom and Gomorrah, there was that city that was stormed by the Hebrews, and there was this one prostitute and her family that was saved. Her name was Rahab, and that was, chat, please help me out. What is the name of that city? Shame on me that I can't remember it right now. But anyway, it seems that these behaviors are of more of like this jealous entity who seems way more like a Skyfather, Zeus type figure. And one other thing that I can add to that is there does seem to be a connection with the war in heaven if we're talking about the fallen angels versus God and his angels, and connecting it to the Hindu idea of the Asuras versus the Devas, where the Devas are like God and his angels. And we could also connect that to the mythology of the Olympian gods versus the Titans. So we see similarities in these cosmic wars for supremacy where there's like the winners and the losers. And if history is written by the winners, that makes me think like, should I necessarily put my hat into the idea that this entity that has the marks of this very jealous Babylonian, Greek, Mesopotamian Skyfather god is the god, is the one, as opposed to LARPing as the one? And it doesn't mean that people wouldn't experience great things from it, but do you see what I mean? Like, that's where a lot of the reservations end up coming from when I just start connecting a lot of these pieces together.
Yeah, no, I see your point. I understand where you're coming from, and a lot of people hold that thought, and it's a common place to to think of. Like, I would say to that what the Old Testament shows us, just to put it simply, of course, it's way more complex than what I'm going to say, but a big kind of theme in the Old Testament books is that the Jewish people kept failing. They kept messing everything up, and God had to keep constantly step in and be like, no, this is how I'm trying to tell you to do it. This is how it's got to be done. So in taking that on, applying that to the idea of, obviously, this idea of Yahweh, this original storm war god, being a jealous god who wants to conquer all the other tribes and destroy their gods, that could be seen simply as the Jews misinterpreting it. It's them getting it wrong again, constantly failing. Why? Because people are infallible. And from my perspective, because of original sin, we're imperfect because of because of the way we are and how we've become. But yeah, okay, so I could see it as, like, obviously you mentioned other cultures, which are all Indo-European to some extent, this strong male figure in being a sky deity, creating the world or whatever, or marrying the earth and all this stuff. That could just simply be, and it's a simple way to look at it, and I could be completely wrong, of just the ancient people trying to come to terms with what they're experiencing and seeing through certain activities, rituals, intuition, prophecies, whatever it may be, or that on top of that also being just a passage of time. Generations and generations pass. Most of these tales were oral. Little things will change. People were pretty good on it, but things over time would change, and different circumstances and contexts change the original story. I definitely believe in a perennial original religion, the faith of Adam, the pure, undistilled, original truth that through the ages and through different peoples became fragmented and broken away, which I would say could be because of the fall of man. So it's all our different interpretations of what originally happened. Now, what did originally happen is hard to say. I could tell you my interpretation of it, but my interpretation would just be one of the many fragments of that single original truth. I do believe that many of the mythologies of ancient peoples are describing a war in heaven, a point of fracture that happened in this original primordial time, that me just describing it, in my view, would be a disservice to it, because I'll never be able to, with any language, be able to properly describe what happened, because it is, in my belief, beyond our feeble minds. We can only get a rough idea of what happened because we only have one perspective. A thing like that, a war in heaven, the very idea of it requires a million perspectives all at once. It's something it cannot be understood in a tangible, materialistic way, because we have to remember we can only discern things from our own experience of observing things around us, and what we observe on a daily basis is the material world around us. So it becomes difficult to fully understand what happened. I think, and I'll segue this into fairies. This is my fragment of what happened. This is what I think. I'm not saying it's gospel truth. I could be completely wrong, but this is what I like to think. So I believe that, yes, there was the original creator, source, God, created reality. Reality comes from him solely. He is creation. He exists solely within and outside of creation. Now, he creates existence, if you can understand that as an abstract idea, reality. And with him were his creations were the spirits, the original spirits. Now, these original spirits would be, I guess the best way to describe it, the ancestors of angels, demons, gods, gnomes, fairies, all of it. They were the original spirits with God in what could be called heaven, and they existed there in an existence that we can't even begin to describe, an existence that had past, present, and future all at once. Let's get wacky with it. They had that, but what we can see is then there was a fracture, there was a division happened, and I believe the division came about from a certain spirit that many religions call one name. The big bad guy, the devil, Lucifer.
Oh, the adversary.
The adversary, yeah.
But what's
The
interesting
rebel.
about the rebel and the adversary, at least in the Jewish texts, is that it's never been looked at as being like this malevolent entity that hates God. It's more of like God's left hand. It's more of
Right.
like the pressure that God applies for the sake of humanity outgrowing its weaknesses.
Right. It's because at the end of the day, he'll always be subservient to God because God created him. He'll never escape that.
Yeah.
That's why he keeps failing. But with this division, in some Islamic texts, I believe, and some other stuff, so they kind of just to paint it in a simple way for us to understand. So say it's like God gets all the original spirits together. He's like, guys, I'm going to show you something I'm working on. And they're always all very excited about this.
Yeah, you're going to be very impressed.
You're going to love this. And they show them Adam. They show them man. And they go, check this out. I'm going to create this. And they're like, wow, that's amazing. What's the deal? And he goes, one day, I'm going to become one. In this grand tapestry that I'm forming, this great song that is coming together, one day I will become one of them. I will be Adam. And it will give this path to them to become me, or something like that. And all the angels rejoiced, all these spirits, they're like, this is amazing. But one was like, wait a minute, no. Why should I be subservient to this man of clay? Why should I bow before him? Why should he be the one who returns to God? Why should you be among him? Why should he have that privilege? He's nothing compared to me, who is pure, original. I'm your left-hand guy. You know,
I'm your number one guy.
Yeah, what the hell? And so the problem with that is, what the big problem was, if we understand it in a Catholic way, angels are beings of pure intelligence. They know everything, in the sense that they know where their actions will lead them. Whereas humans, at the point we are now, we don't. That's why we have access to repentance, because we can never really fully understand what we're doing. So when we commit a sin, we can repent for it in a truer way. An angel cannot, because the angel knows why you shouldn't do that, what it will result in. That's why Lucifer, Satan, is kind of the prince of pride. He knew he would lose this war. He knew that it's impossible for him to dethrone God or to take his place. He knows he can't do it, but the problem is he did it anyway. He still did it. That's the distortion. That's the collapse. That's the fracture.
But you're calling him Lucifer, and that's so that caused the fall. But in calling him Lucifer, the weird thing to me is that, from what I understand, Lucifer was never meant to be like Satan or Antichrist or anything. It was just like Lightbringer, and that was even something that was referred to as Jesus.
Right. I use Lucifer interchangeably with Satan, the adversary. Let's say the evil one, to make it easier. The evil one did this knowing fully what would happen, but he still did it anyway. And it could be believed that maybe he convinced these other original spirits to go along with him, and they themselves also committed the same crime as he did. They were in the same position. So this caused this division. And we're told, I guess, like you said, the victor writes the story, writes the history. They were the forces of God, of good, defeated these separatist forces, basically. And from what they did, their punishment was they were sent away to be distant from God into the lower world, the underworld, a place of hell, basically, as we understand it in a modern Christian sense. I don't think it's as simple as that, but they were thrown away. And I think so. The ones who fought with God stayed up in heaven, became angels or higher spirits. The ones who fought against him became demons and went into hell. But what about spirits that stayed? Was there spirits that stayed neutral? So if these spirits stayed neutral, they tried to stay out of it. They didn't rebel against God, but they didn't fight for him or with him. So they didn't fall all the way down, but they fell somewhere else in the middle world, where man also happens to inhabit. Because man did fall too. Man did make a mistake, but it wasn't man lacked to understand what would happen if he did this. It came from a place of ignorance. Lord, forgive them, for they do not know. So I believe that what we have been discussing, these natural spirits, fae, fairies, gnomes, leprechauns, pixies, you name them, I believe those beings were beings that didn't take a stance. They tried to stay out of it. And because of that, they didn't fall fully. they came down to Earth, or a primordial Earth, a beginning stage, and became a part of the creation. That's why they're so entwined with the quote-unquote natural world. So it was kind of like a halfway punishment. It was like a slap on the wrist. It's like, you're not going to get thrown out, but you're going to be here, and this is your job now.
But if they were all-knowing in a way, then wouldn't they have known that should they rebel, they were going to get this kind of punishment?
Yes,
they did. Because
Yes, they
in Father Chad Ripperger, he's a Chad, as his name
I
implies.
knew you were going to say that.
Yeah, but he founded an exorcist order. And how Catholic exorcisms work, they'd invoke the name of the Trinity, etc. And the demons, being naturally subservient to the Almighty, will tell the truth, but they'll first lie, and then they'll be kind of tortured basically by the names of God, and then they'll tell the truth. And what they said to him was, they basically said, like, you know, the demon said, yes, like I fell, I rebelled against God. And then, you know, the father said, well, if you knew that this would happen, if you chose it, you know, like, why did you? And basically the theology of angels and demons, which are fallen angels, it's the idea that, you know, if a human thinks about something, like, for example, we often have intrusive thoughts, but even if you just pondered on it, that doesn't mean you've done it. Am I lagging a bit? Anyways.
No, you're good.
Okay, good. So it doesn't mean you've done it, but with an angel, it's like if they think about it or ponder it, they've done it. That's how they work. So, you know, Father Ripperger said, you know, in the exorcism, he goes, so you knew that doing so would cause you this torment? The demon says yes. And he goes, so, you know, if you could, would you do it again? The demon said yes. So regardless of the fact that the demon is suffering, being tormented, and they despise the position they're in that their decision got them to, they simply can't even think of not doing it because they've done it. So that's kind of how it works, because they're kind of more pure beings in a sense. Like they just do, you know, what they think of, and like their shadow, or like their kind of like I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for, id or whatever, Freudian word, like that's just who they are, like, so they just are that.
But ultimately they are also an aspect of God, since there cannot be anything without God. So in a way, God made them make those particular choices. I mean, this goes into a very philosophical area of talking about God as being like an all-knowing entity, and would that not mean that humanity and our free will is nothing but a joke if everything's predetermined anyway? You know, if any decision we make is going to be based on something that God already knows is going to happen to us, why are we executing people? Why are we arresting people? You know, like, it's they're not the ones who are doing it if it's like all God.
I'd say that it can fall back to, this is what I do, it helps me sleep, is God allows these things to happen. God is the greatest storyteller and comedian in existence. What a great divine comedy humor that is, like, yes, he knew all this was going to happen. He knew all this was going to happen, but it's because it's a part of a greater story. And again, many, you know, you can argue it could just be a cop out at that point, but it's like God works in mysterious ways. You know, who knows the reason why these things were allowed to go into motion, why he knew all this was going to happen and let it happen anyway. It could be all part of a greater mystery, and maybe, God willing, the answer is revealed to us, where the next great step we'll take when our mortal bodies finally wither away. Who knows? It's a hard thing to determine, because when you try to work out what that is, you're getting into ground where you're trying to think how God thinks. And that's nearly impossible, or is impossible, for us to even begin to comprehend, thinking, trying to understand what God thinks. It's too much for us to bear, because it's just, we're just nothing compared to him. So it's just, you just can't even begin to contemplate what God thinks, what God's actions are, what his plans are, whatever it may be. It's a similar thing. I think it's the same thing as where, if you try to describe void or nothing, If you say there was a time of nothing, you have already failed because you have called it nothing. You have given it a name. You have given something that isn't something a name. I've already failed now just describing it to you. That process.
No,
It's the
I
same
know,
thing.
yeah. I know
You
exactly
can't
what you
begin.
mean. Like, it's very difficult to describe it. The only thing that may happen there is that could also be used as kind of a coping mechanism by people who would not want to venture further into understanding of reality as best as they can if they'll only fall in, well, we're not going to know it anyway, so we're just going to settle for whatever it is that we're told, and that may create an opportunity for abuse, because all of a sudden you have somebody who claims that they know what the truth is, and they're saying that truth to the little people below, and the little people are just so used to this idea, well, we're not going to know anyway, so we're just going to fall back on whatever the priest tells us. And that is my number one issue. Like, if I had one issue with organized religion, that would be the top one. That for a long time you've had, like in these medieval villages, people didn't really, from what I understand, know what exactly was being said most of the time because it was in Latin. And so you kind of just relied on the priest and the bishop to give you whatever it is that should be given. And you could say, well, they were doing a good job, everything was neat and tidy, but how the hell do I know? None of us know whether or not that was the case or not.
Well, it was the Mass that's in Latin. I still attend Mass in Latin, but they still give the homily in vernacular, like, I guess, a way to kind of explain it would be, the ultimate, knowing God is the ultimate goal still, only it can be achieved after the physical body dies, because it's like an alchemical process, like the Mass. And, then you know God, but you know him in a way that you're united with him. But ultimately, I think, our true will is God's will. The same way you might want to do something, like you might want to do some sort of drug or, some sort of sexual debauchery, whatever, you want to do it, but you don't really want to. Like, there's something that feels wrong after these things because you're seeking something that you haven't actually got. It's like you're trying to fill a God-shaped hole. But regardless, this is a fascinating discussion, but I can't help but find it funny. No one expects the Spanish Inquisition. All of a sudden, we're talking about Christianity and trying to convince. But maybe we could segue towards the grey spirits, as we were talking about, or the fairies or whatever.
Absolutely. Let's segue to that. Before that, I have to grab my phone, which I threw into the pit of Mordor as I was trying to make sure that it wouldn't interfere with the broadcast as we were starting. While I do that, though, I know we did it before, but can you give all the good people info as far as where to find you, and same thing with Ingurdiz, and then I swear to God I'm going to get something out of Aaron. You're sitting here observing all of this. I want you to say something, but as soon as I come back. So plug away, gentlemen. I'm going to be right back.
Okay, so I'll start if that's okay with everyone else.
Yeah, go for it.
My name is Outlaw Prime, of course. I'm on Twitter at Outlaw_Prime, which I'm going to post now in the chat, which will actually be posted by my YouTube channel now. I've uploaded one serious video and one joke video, so I haven't been much of a YouTuber yet, but I may make a couple of YouTube videos soon, especially of my writings, which can be found. Actually, you know what? They can't be found. You're just gonna have to find it yourself if you want to read them. But I've just decided that I'm going to be like an alchemist about it. But yeah, so I'm hopefully going to start uploading readings of my writings on YouTube, and maybe even more, whatever. So yeah, follow the Twitter account. There's lots of stuff going on there, and likewise the YouTube channel. Subscribe. You never know what might come out of it.
Nice. And Ingurdiz.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at the Third Eye 777, and on my pinned tweet is a link to my link tree where you can find my writing mostly, and I also post on my Twitter some artwork and all that kind of stuff. I'm just kind of always hanging around, just kind of spitting into the ether. So yeah, check me out if you're interested.
Excellent. And MorbidforFun. Let all the good people know where to find you, and then let us know what you think of this conversation.
All right, for sure. So I obviously do YouTube, Morbid for Fun on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, basically everywhere. The whole conversation thing, like I don't know how to explain it, but I was not expecting the whole fairy thing to go like this deep. Because like at first, like all right, cool, you guys got your own little stories, but then like we just digged way deep and like this is like too much to swallow in like one call. But like yeah, it's fascinating what you guys were talking about, especially like, the stories, like your encounters. I do believe the whole encounters. Like I had my own personal encounters like with other things that they're probably not fairies at all. But it's fascinating.
Can we know what those encounters were? Can you give us a little bit of detail on that?
Yeah, sure. I have two. The first one happened when I was like in elementary school. I don't know. It's probably like some type of ghost. I don't even know. It was like in this like house too. So I think I was like in third grade or whatever, and a pencil. Like it was just me. I was home alone. A pencil was like randomly chucked back of my head. The point thing just hit me. And at first, I'm like, oh, it's probably my dad. He just throws something because, like, sometimes when he sees me that I'm too focused on something, like he'll throw like a little paper ball or whatever. But like a pencil, he would never do that. And then I just got up, and he wasn't there, which was weird. Like it was an actual like hard throw.
How do you know that your dad wasn't hiding behind, the
He was working at that time, like when I was in elementary. Another encounter. I don't know if you guys are familiar with doppelgangers.
Doppelganger. Well, kind of like the changeling we were talking about, right? Like, or not really. What is a doppelganger?
From my understandings, when this happened to me, I did do my own research, and apparently, like it's some type of like spirit that's stuck in the world that like it just stays on Earth and like takes its like basically how do I explain this? Let me search it up real quick.
Yes, and by the way, everybody, make sure to smash that subscribe button right now. All the people from Morbid for Fun's channel, I know you're out there, I know you're listening to this, and I know you want to do double dosages of Break the Rules, triple, quadruple, quadruple now, and the only way you can do that is by subscribing, keeping this thing going. Patreon.com/breaktherules, become a patron today, and you are going to get very beautiful magnets created by my father, Alexander Polyakov, who is an amazing craftsman, artist, I don't know what you would call it, but he's just one of a kind. And I'm going to put a picture of the magnet over here on the screen for you guys to take a look at it. And so be sure to click the bell. Not a lot of people have clicked the bell and break the rules. So listen, to all you people who are watching this right now, if you have not clicked the bell, make sure you click it right now. Go there right now. I'm watching you. Go there right now. Why aren't you going? Do it right now. Anyway, here are the magnets. I'm going to quickly show them to you guys. And here they are. Check this out. See? Look at that. Look at that beautiful quality over here. See if I can make it less blurry for you gentlemen here. There we go. You see the magnets?
Gorgeous.
Nice, right? Yeah,
Beautiful.
so those magnets can be yours if you become a patron, patreon.com/breaktherules. And also other goodies there for you guys to enjoy. So anyway, back to you, Aaron.
All right, so I searched out the definition on Google. It's a doppelganger is often portrayed as a ghostly or paranormal phenomenon and usually seen as a harbinger of bad luck. I probably don't know how to read that word. So basically, from the video that I saw like a while back, it was like apparently a spirit can't go to heaven or hell, so like it's just stuck in the world. So it takes its place as like a human, basically disguise itself. I don't know how to explain it. It's weird.
What do you guys think?
I recommend to search up the definition because I do not know how to explain all of this.
I myself haven't had any encounter with a ghost, not formally. But yeah, that's very interesting. The flying objects is like a thing that people experience a lot, like objects just flying across their room. Yeah, that is very interesting. And as for the doppelganger, I can't help somewhat immaturely but think about a game I played before when I was younger. It's like a Tomb Raider game. I have a lot of love for the Tomb Raider thing. And Lara Croft has a doppelganger.
Yeah, I remember that scene. Yeah.
She's
if you
like
kept shooting at her, she'd shoot back. So there was like some other way that you can defeat her. And then And then they had that giant, that meaty giant, looked like a guy like without a skin. You remember he was in a.
Mhm.
Now that was a very interesting version of Atlantis that was portrayed there. So for those who don't know, in the original Tomb Raider game, the last level was Atlantis, and Lara Croft was in this facility that was made out of, it looked like she was like Lemmy Winks inside of Mr. Slave's ass, like she was like inside of this bones and guts type of you remember, right, like this palace that's
Yes. Yeah.
it's like an organic palace. It's like made out of matter. And I recall that there was a thread back on Twitter from Helios Logos who described you guys are familiar with Helios, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know why he doesn't come on BTR anymore. Helios Logos, if you're out there, I want you back on BTR stat. But anyway.
He's a weird guy, so don't worry about it.
He was describing how Atlantis looked like, where the reason why we don't have any artifacts from Atlantis was because most of it was made out of organic matter. So when you lived in a house... kind of like in the Flintstones where they have like an elephant that, helps you wash the dishes and, all kinds of other animals, like maybe like like one of the animals was like a garbage, or like a toilet or something, that's horrible to think about. But anyway, similar thing must have happened in Atlantis, according to him, where the houses would have been made out of this flexible organic matter that can shift. So instead of having like a dedicated room for one thing, you can just like morph the rooms into whatever you want. It's almost like you have access today to this artificial intelligence drawing apparatus where you can just like input a code and it's going to create whatever you want. I mean, it's still in its relatively, mild stages for now. I mean, pretty soon, you're going to create whatever scene you want to with whatever celebrity. But imagine that, but in the physical world. So you would be able to have such a manipulation of cells and atoms and whatever, where you can just like recreate these genetic monstrosities, like these chimeras of animals, but you would also be able to do a similar thing to your house, to your room, so the entire world in a way would be able to be under your control. And from all the stories that people talked about Atlantis, and here we go kind of back to that whole idea of, that war, not so much in heaven, but, within that ancient civilization, this idea of people taking it a little too far when it comes to the insight that they have of how things work, where their greed and their lust gets the better of them, and all of a sudden, yes, they have high technology, but what do they use that high technology for? If they use that technology to do horrible things and to manipulate beings, especially if we're talking about working with organic matter to create like these palaces that are almost like living beings themselves, like there's all kinds of room for trouble there. So I don't know if there's anything within the Irish or English mythology that also talks to that kind of manipulation of matter, or whether this is just like IRL schizoposting right now. But let me know what you guys think.
Well, from what I know and what I've heard, that's like flesh sculpting, which is like that was like when that kind of those higher ancient civilizations and societies just completely degenerated into just complete madness. It's the only word we can use to describe that. It's all the worst stuff you can think of. When you try to conceptualize in your mind the idea of people living in like living buildings, fleshy bone, it brings about disgust. It's disgusting, and
it's also kind of funny in a morbid
funny,
way.
But it's like there's just such an essence of like torture to it, because that's what it is, and that's what they did. Sculpting flesh and using that, it's all fueled by pain and misery. It's pure evil.
Well,
That's
what
why
if they're
Atlantis
dead?
tank.
Well, what if they're dead? What if it's just like they're reanimating the... Like, have you heard recently, like, they want to... There was a proposition to use a dead woman's body for birthing children.
May God strike us down for our sins.
Yeah, we need to have...
Lord, come with fire, please.
We need Mr. Vice on, Mr. Black Pope Vice. I recommend everyone look him up on Twitter, but he's a necromancer, Catholic necromancer, and he knows his stuff. And when I say that, I mean he is literally a necromancer, one of the last and the first. So he says, but Yeah, that is so interesting. Actually, originally, not to make this a Tomb Raider stream, but originally the doppelganger's model was actually a fleshy, like, character without skin.
It's
So it's really
essentially
interesting.
so it's essentially like an inversion of life, which
Mm,
kind
mm.
of relates to like the demonic, which is like basically spitting in the face of God, where you just do something that's just for the sake of it, to be just the complete opposite, which derives from like a dualistic mind view, which I think is like spiritually damaging. So it drives you to do like, what is the complete opposite of the natural good? I know, let's build houses out of dead bodies, like, and fetishize pain and torturing people. That's the madness that like we remember in our bones, the horrors of pre pre this age or whatever, that Atlantean age, because I definitely think there's truth to that in regards to Atlantis. Like that left a mark that we all remember subconsciously. It's that weird feeling that we know that our ancestors, we must remember that they were our ancestors, some of them who did really messed up shit. And that's why Atlantis was struck down, rightly so, and it sank into the ocean, or it sank out of time.
Out of
Um,
time. I love that
it
interpretation.
sank out of time. That's why we can't find anything. It no longer exists because it didn't exist, but it does exist.
Mm.
Well, you know what they say about comedy, that comedy is a tragedy plus time. So when it comes to
Yeah.
us also finding a lot of these things kind of funny, it's almost like you have something like Tim and Eric, which to me has always been. I know like a lot of Sam Hyde fans fucking hate Tim and Eric because of, all that stuff. But anyway, what I love about the Tim and Eric universe is that they also kind of invert reality in that instead of breathing through the nose, when they want to smell something, when they want to smell something, they smell through the mouth. They like like that, and it's
Yeah.
just like seeing things like that, or like they had this one program called the Bro Och. It was a commercial for this product called the Bro Och, where this guy was vomiting because his friend's shirt was too plain, and the only way to cure that was to screw in a brooch, a male brooch, mind you, right through his body, like into his ribs, and have like various designs. Like you can have a peace signal, notice it's not called a peace sign, it's called a peace signal, and a decorative masculine flower, things of that nature. So
Mm.
the idea that people would go through all this grueling, unnecessary process to do something that shouldn't have been done in the first place, like, I think that is also kind of spitting in the face of reality and spitting in the face of God. But it is funny to us because we see kind of like the tragedy of humanity and almost like an evil force of represented by that. But at the same time, I think we do need comedy, because without comedy, without that edge, the edge, without that edge, like, what are we? Like, we're not just like these automaton robots that are always doing everything right and good. It's kind of like that Biggie Smalls lyric, when I die, fuck it, I want to go to hell because I'm a piece of shit. It ain't hard to fucking tell. It don't make sense being with the goodies dressed in white. I like black Tims and black hoodies, so on and so forth.
Bars.
Like imagine just being in heaven and just like being with all the goodies and just playing harps all day. That does not seem to be that interesting, is it?
Well, what you said about comedy there being tragedy plus time. I know you didn't come up with that, but what you said about
Yes.
it really does speak for Ingurdiz's response as to, like, the bad things happening, God being real, because God is the greatest comedian. And Plotinus, I think it was Plotinus, said that the closest to the divine that man gets in this world is through humor, and that's also why we're not like robot automatons. But also, there's a lot of humor, of course, in Ireland in general, because there's a lot of tragedy there as well. But in the fairy folk stories, there's a lot of humor in them. And I have a story, if you would like to hear it. It's a classic Irish folk fairy tale, and it's funny, but it's also disturbing, and it also has biological torture in it. So I think that'll really fit what we've been talking about. So I may read it out. I'll summarize it my own way. But
I'm ready for the story. Only thing before the story is, number one, everybody subscribe who did not, and number two, Aaron, any thoughts on the Atlantis thing that we were just talking about right now, or any thoughts in general? Like, I want to make sure that you have any questions. If you have any questions about anything we talked about before the story, I would love to hear that.
For the like I said in the beginning, like all of this is like a lot to like take in, like but the whole Atlantis thing, I don't know much about it, to be honest, other than what you guys were talking about. Like, yeah, I've seen it like in movies, shows, stuff like that, but the whole like actual thing, I don't know really.
If there was anything that you would be interested in exploring further from this conversation, what would it be? What do you think? What do you think was the least clear thing to you? Like, I know there was a lot said, but if you had to pick like one thing you'd be interested in kind of digging more into.
It's not that it wasn't clear, like it's pretty cool. It's a good conversation, but it's just like it's just like a lot to take in. Because I assume like there's way more to it, of course.
Definitely.
Yeah. So it's just like it's a new thing that I'm like learning right now.
Well, I'm glad that you're learning it, and I would definitely love to have you back here. And
Yep.
would you be interested in getting more acquainted with certain aspects of this, and then coming back and talking about it like in more detail? And if
yeah.
so, like, would it be like the whole package, or again, like out of all the things here, which thing would you find to be the most fascinating for you personally?
Honestly, I'd say like the Atlantis thing is pretty interesting. I think it's pretty fascinating. The whole fairy thing, like it just the rabbit hole was like way too deep. Like it was just we talked about that for like a somewhat long period of time, so it was like a tough pill to swallow. But I'm pretty sure like the Atlantis thing would be cool and fascinating to learn.
Definitely. We here at Break the Rules love to talk about Atlantis, so more streams about Atlantis are coming. Be sure to subscribe for that as well. Outlaw Prime, it's time for the story. I'm very excited. Go for it, my brother.
all right, gentlemen. So this is the story of the hunchback of Knockgrafton. So there once was a man named Lusmore, and he was a poor hunchback who lived in the Galtee Mountains, in the green glen of Aherlow. And he was called Lusmore. It wasn't his real name. It was more of a nickname, because Lusmore basically means foxglove. And he'd always carry a foxglove in the sprig of his hat. So I'll come back to the foxglove and what that has to do with fairies later. But essentially what happened was he's a very crafty man. He was a herbalist. He was very skillful. He was able to weave straw and rushes. And there was a time, where that was a very useful thing. It's not so much now, but he was very good for making hats and baskets. And he was even able to tell stories about designing them. He was a good storyteller as well. But he'd also create charms that would help the harvest and would fend off dark spirits.
Lucky
on
charms.
Samhain. Exactly. Lucky charms, you could say. But that's the only Lucky Charms you'd find in Ireland. I don't think I've ever once seen a box of Lucky Charms in my life.
Oh, and by the way, to be clear, foxglove, for those who don't know, it's a kind of flower.
Right, yeah, that's what it is, and it can be used in medicine, which will be important later, not in the story, but I'll give some context later. So there was one day he was there, and he's being a hunchback, naturally enough, he'd be very uncomfortable, and he'd just be there, when he sat down, his chin would nearly touch his knees, like, do you know what I mean? It'd be a very uncomfortable way to live, and walking around, you'd be in a lot of pain constantly. But he still walked around a lot, and he was walking one evening from Cahir to Kappa, and he essentially grew tired because of this sore hunch on his back. So he sat down by the mound on Knockgrafton after the sun had set. Now, like I said before, the she, which is the Irish word for fairies, more or less, is closely associated with mounds, these burial mounds. So he sat there, and then the sun went down. So you can only imagine the kind of things that we're getting up to at that hour. So he just kind of tried to stretch a bit and fix his back, and the moon rose up. And at that time, he heard this strange, almost unearthly music coming from somewhere. It was neither here nor there, but it was actually below him. So what he did was he pressed his ear down onto the ground, and that was quite uncomfortable. But he was shocked when he heard the melodies that were coming and making the grasses shiver beneath him. The voices sang, De Luan de Mart, De Luan de Mart, De Luan de Mart, which means, in Irish, Monday, Tuesday, Monday, Tuesday, Monday, Tuesday. And they sang that and then they stopped. And Lustmore was sad because he really loved the song. Even though it was simple, it was really moving and it really captivated the spirit. So then he thought perhaps he could add something to it. They sang up again and said, De Luan de Mort, De Luan de Mort, De Luan de Mort. And he said, August de Caedin, along with the beat of the music. And de Caedin is Wednesday, Oskelga. So he thought that that naturally enough would add to the song. But after he said that, everything stopped. There was a single beat of a drum, boom, like that, and it stopped. He held his breath in fright. He was fearful because he thought he was after ruining the song. But what ended up happening was the fairies, which were underneath him, held a council, something they don't often do. But they said to each other, the song they were singing was one of their ancient tunes, and it had been that way ever since they'd gone down to the mounds. But it was only when Lustmore added De Caedin that it had been sublimated, it had been finally perfected. So with that, they reached up from the mound and they took him down into the underworld. He felt himself grabbed by many hands, and he spun around and around as though in a great wind, and into the dark earth he went, as if it were no more than smoke. And they weren't a bit shocked at his appearance, the fairies. And what they did was they plied him with rich meads and rare delicacies, and they sang and danced around him in circles, celebrating him as if he was one of their own. He was happy with this, but at the same way, he was confused because his own people didn't treat him that way. They saw him as somewhat of a freak because of his appearance. Then he saw a large gathering of fairies talking with one another very urgently. Then, as though they were one, they spun and faced him, pointing their fingers, and as one they sang, Lustmore, doubt not, nor deplore, for the hump which you bore on your back is no more. Look down on the floor and see it, Lustmore. Astonished, he looked down, and didn't he see the great weight that he'd borne since a child topple from his shoulders and fall onto the ground. At that moment, Lustmore stretched and stood upright for the first time in his life, and he felt a great comfort and a great satisfaction. He was finally a fine and handsome man. So his head spun, as told in the story, and he ended up falling asleep amongst the fairies. And when he woke up, wasn't he there in a field amongst the cattle and sheep having their breakfast on the dew-covered grass? And the morning sun shone down on him, and he felt as though he regretted waking up because it was so wonderful, his dream from the last night. But then he stood up, fully upright, and realized it wasn't a dream at all. That had truly happened, and now he was fixed. So that's when he went back to his usual life, and he had, gone on with his herbalism, and he was as happy as he ever was, until one morning a woman knocked him on the door and asked him, could he direct her to Kappa? And he said he couldn't, because he was already in Kappa. And then she said, well, where do you get to the house of Lustmore? Because she had knocked on his herbalist shed, and that's what she was asking. So he had truth in his heart, so he shared his story with the woman. He said, well, look, on the way from my house to Kappa, this is what happened to me, and this was the cure I had. So she went on her journey, this mysterious woman, and she went to Waterford, and she told a man who she knew very well, a humpback himself, Jack Madden. She told Jack Madden the whole story, and she told him about how you can get to the Mound of Knockgrafton and you may be cured by the fairies. So Jack Madden now is a different man. He might have had a hunchback in common with Lustmore, but he had nothing else in common. He was a very peevish, very cunning and impatient man, and he was prone to bad habits, and he wasn't a very skilled man whatsoever. And he didn't often go on walks, but he decided to go on a walk to get this elusive cure that he had heard of. So when he went there, did the same thing as Lustmore, he heard the music. And he heard the music, De Lune de Mort, De Lune de Mort, De Lune de Mort. And he said, August Deirdeen, August Dehina, which means Thursday and Friday. Because with his craftiness and greed, he figured he'd get, double the reward if he said both two words, 2 days of the week. But the music stopped and the fairies came up, but this time they were screeching and they were bellowing and they said, "Who spoiled our lovely song?" And they drug Jack Madden down to await his prize, and they shouted at him, Jack Madden, Jack Madden, your words came so crassin, the song we felt glad in, your life we will sadden. Here's 2 humps for you, Jack Madden. And there you go, 24 of the strongest fairies held him down, and they stuck another hump on him. And when they went out to find him in the morning, the woman and the others, they thought they'd see a straightened man with a new suit on him and happy as days. Instead, they found a man half dead with a hump almost the size of the mound itself. They went home then, and they gossiped about it and told dangers about the trifling with fairy gifts. Although the mound itself can actually be found to this day. It's just on the border of Tipperary. If anyone listening wants to go to the mound themselves, if you happen to be a hunchback, that would be a crazy, crazy coincidence. But you know what you do. You don't ruin the song. You add to it, but you don't try to get something out of it.
Wow.
That's the tale.
Nice. Now, was it one hump that was now bigger, or was it like 2 humps like Sonic the Hedgehog spikes, on the side? I don't know which.
Yeah, literally, he was added a second hump to his previous hump, which I presume would have resembled a large hump, but it could have also been very misshapen.
But if it's as big as a mound, that would mean that it would be way bigger than the other hump, I take it. I don't know. I mean, yeah.
It probably would have been a bit of like humor to say it was as big as the mound.
Yeah, I kind of got that. Now, last question for you. Have you seen that movie? I think you know the one I'm going to talk about, right? The one with Colin Farrell and the Banshees of...
All right.
Have you seen it?
The Banshees of Inisherin, I actually have not seen. I have not. But
all right, then we're not going to talk about it right now, because first you're going to see it, and then I would love to have you back, and we're going to talk about that movie. But anyway, guys, this has been a wonderful stream. I definitely appreciate everybody being here. Outlaw Prime, thank you so much, brother, for coming back. For the first time, we have Ingurdiz and MorbidforFun. I hope to have you guys back as well.
For sure.
And I would definitely love to do, if you're interested, a friendly debate about, because like the whole Christianity thing, I think that it would be very interesting to have somebody like my friend Neil, Gnostic Informant, coming in and talking about a lot of these things when it comes to more of the history and the philosophy. This guy's read all of them. He's read Origen. He's read all the Neoplatonists. He's read you name it. He's read it already. The guy is a living dictionary from what I'm finding right now. And it's weird because like this dude, he came from a background of he was arrested even for possession of, I think it was like the oxys, because he was heavily addicted to that. And then he was in this fundamentalist Christian sect in the United States, obviously, where they were, I think it was like an end time sort of thing. And he can tell you a little bit more information about that. But from there, he kind of went on to question a lot of the beliefs that he had held originally, and ended up going into the various history books and the various writings of the philosophers, and trying to figure out exactly like what is the history of Christianity. And he's not a Christ mythicist, like he's not like somebody who doesn't believe that Christ existed at all. He believes that there was a figure who was a prophet, named Jesus. But as far as what exactly was the origin of that particular belief, whether it was linked to Judaism, to the Hebrew religion that came before, that's more of where things get a little bit questioning. So it would be interesting to kind of like go through the nitty-gritty meat of what exactly is here, if you guys are interested in coming back for that.
Yeah, sure, that sounds fun. I'd absolutely be down for that.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's see what we can do there. And Aaron, Morbid for Fun, you guys have to check out this guy's videos. I was watching the one about the cursed McDonald's cups, the
Oh, yeah.
cadmium-laden cups, and we should probably, like, would you ever do a stream where you like drink out of one of those cups? Just like if you get like a certain amount of subscribers, you're gonna do that, or is it too risky?
I don't know. It said that if you like touch the glass like 8 times, if you're like a 6-year-old, you would expose yourself to as much as you can safely consume. As an adult, I mean, like I said in the video, if you drink out of the cup, you're not gonna die. But I mean, I wouldn't recommend it, of course.
And what else are you cooking up right now? Like, you're still gonna have to make that special delivery to Tuv. Can you tell us a little bit about who Tuv is and what exactly you're doing there?
Yeah, so Tuv, he's a good friend of mine. He makes similar content to me, but like the thing is, he's a way bigger channel. He has like over 1 million subscribers, 1.5, I believe. He inspired me to make, my videos. We're good friends. I kind of knew him before he blew up and before he made that type of content. He kind of inspired me to do because it's something that I'm very like fascinated about, like morbid, creepy stuff. So I decided to, make my own videos. It's same morbid videos, but I come up with my own topics, so it won't be like a direct copy. Right now, I am working on the next video where I talk about like just more weird, disturbing YouTube videos. But the whole meetup thing with Tuv, I don't know how much I can talk about it, but we are planning something very very soon, like a meetup type thing, like very soon.
You guys have to link up, and you should dress up as Spot'em Got'em, and Tuv should dress up as Pooh Shiesty, and you should have like that lips. You remember like those evil-looking lips with that grin on the Say Cheese logo?
I think I know what you're talking. I think I know what it is, but
Yeah,
look at it.
Outlaw and Ingurdiz. Do you know what I'm talking about? The whole meme with Pooh Shiesty and
Yeah.
Spot'em Got'em.
I know
do,
there's a
yeah.
yeah, I know about that.
Yeah, and maybe you could even have your hair, go like, like a bunch of fries, French fries. I don't know. There's a lot of potential here as far as what's going to happen when the two of you link up. But whatever it is going to be very powerful, and I look forward to the day that finally happens. And one last question, Aaron. What other subjects would you personally be interested in finding more about, not just within what we talked about right now, like with Atlantis and stuff, but in general? What are some of the mysteries that you are interested in?
Well, one really big mystery that I'm really interested in, it involves like YouTube. Like I'm just a sucker for like when it comes to YouTube dark stuff, but I don't know what you would call it. Somebody called it the gutter of YouTube because if you search up like a period, like weird symbols, you would like legit get the most disturbing videos. Like if you go on YouTube right now, literally search up a period, just a period, and just scroll down, you'll see some like very dark, disturbing stuff. Like if
Well,
you keep, what's that?
I'm going to do that, but this also reminds me a bit of like the indecipherable language stuff. It reminds me of this thing on 4chan back in 2016 called Forgotten Languages. Outlaw Prime and Ingurdiz. Do you guys know what I'm talking about here? Does this ring any bells or not?
I think so. Yeah.
So Forgotten Languages, I still am not sure what exactly that's. Oh wow, I'm already seeing some disturbing guys. If you type in the period, Morbid's not wrong about this. There's a lot of weird stuff going on here, and it says full stop punctuation. So yeah, that's pretty interesting. I'm gonna take a look at that later.
Also,
But
you
yeah,
have to warn you, if you keep on like scrolling, I'm pretty sure the video itself isn't bad, but they like the thumbnails are the most disturbing part. Like they would actually use screenshots from like gore videos, stuff like that. It's crazy.
yeah.
Like,
Well,
don't-
I see
yeah,
like a
don't-
mouse. There's like a creepy looking three-dimensional mouse character, like an animation character. I don't know what's going on with the mouse. I'll find out. There's another one who looks kind of like a man that's been, overly tanned, let's put it that way. Yeah, and there's like the dolphin guy, there's like the guys with the buzzsaw next to them. Although I think my favorite one is the one who looks like a shadow, but the head is like a weird triangle shape, and this is good stuff. But yeah, Forgotten Languages was similar in that there was this website with all this gibberish written there, but when you clicked on it, it went to all these strange videos that allegedly made you feel incredibly sick. And there wasn't anything bad shown in the videos, like there wasn't any gore or stuff like that. It was just the imagery, the way that the colors were, the way that the various backgrounds were superimposed next to each other. It felt weird, like it kind of like maybe Atlantis, or like Atlantis when it was going south. That may be the energy of that place. I don't know, just because it felt high tech, and it felt like there was a lot of use of this organic matter, but it was all done in this very offsetting way. So take a look at Forgotten Languages if you want to. And yeah, I don't know, Outlaw Prime and Ingurdiz, before we go, any internet lore of that kind of like creepy YouTube stuff that you guys are aware of that Aaron may be interested in?
All I know is once myself and the lads, we have a projector. We had a big projector up on the screen and we were watching YouTube, and we decided it'd be funny to type in random letters and just click on random videos. We clicked on this one video. We clicked on a couple of videos now. They're really weird, random ones. But this one was like one of the most disturbing things I've ever seen. It was this young, like really young girl who was like Asian child, you know, and it started off like in this really dark, creepy basement. And then she just comes down out of nowhere. She looks at the screen. I feel almost bad for saying this. She looks at the screen and then she literally reaches to take off like her top. And then the video cuts out. And we felt sick to our stomachs, and we never played that fucking game again, typing in random letters. But it goes to show there's some really, really disturbing, fucked up things and really weird fucking people out there on the clear net, not even the dark web, just on the internet.
Yeah.
And I, of course, do not recommend looking that up because that was just disturbing. But that was first thing that came to mind when something disturbed me greatly on YouTube. It was that. But the fact that that even is on YouTube just goes to show how.
Well, you remember Elsagate, the kind of stuff that was gotten away with there. I mean, that's kind of like a classic example, but it's only because they were able to. It's only because enough people knew that it existed that it was able to be taken down. But then there was also like the stuff about like the monkey torture. You remember like people for some reason. I mean, it's like the poor monkeys, and you have these people that are just so sick of these monkeys. But apparently there's like an explanation for that the people who were the majority of those who didn't like the monkeys, they were living, I believe, in like Southeast Asia, where those monkeys are actually like real pests. So imagine having to deal with these monkeys, you know, day after day of them just like ruining your entire life. At a certain point, like... Not that I'm saying it's great that those things, you know, obviously this is horrible, horrible stuff, you know, like, you know, all life, you know, especially like all animal life is just like innocent, you know, but the idea, like, it does kind of make sense that you would have all these normies that all of a sudden would be entrapped by this desire to see horrible things happen to these monkeys, and how you would then end up having people paid. Like people in Southeast Asia, you know, because it's like a poor place, you would have people that are getting paid for like the monkey destruction, and it's like, holy shit, you know, that's humanity for you.
I never heard the context for it. I can kind of sleep better now knowing, because I was thinking like, what the fuck kind of Freudian pathology is this that you want to murder monkeys brutally? But still fucked. But like you said, that makes more sense now.
Well, evil I find to be kind of banal a lot of the times. Like, people attribute evil to even us. Like, right now we were talking about, like these Atlantean masterminds figuring out all kinds of sadistic ways. But in order for society, I think, to get to that level, it really does take the normie to get to that level. You know, like, once a normie is okay with certain things being gotten away with, you know, whether it was, you know, like the persecution of the Jews during, you know, Hitler's reign, or whether it was, you know, people being annihilated and tortured, like on the rack for, you know, committing certain offenses. You know, like people, and even today, like in, you know, places in the Middle East or whatever, we have examples of like this very harsh punishment for things that other places kind of learn to do in a different way. And part of us could say like, well, you know what, maybe a certain part of humanity needs that kind of punishment to, like, you know, be kept in line or whatever, or otherwise things would go nuts. But if we were able to get out of that predicament in certain societies, then that should really be, in the long term at least, the focus, right? Like, figure out, like, can we live a life where we would not have to utilize these kind of punishments in order to correct whatever mistakes we see going on in society? Because in a way, like, I think going in that direction, and that's why, like, when I was talking about, like, organized religion and stuff like that, that's always, like, the shadow aspect of it for me, that we're going to have a lot of these very cruel and unusual things that normies kind of get used to. And if they don't question it, if they're, like, okay with it, if it's just, like, part of the program as normies embrace it, then we're going to be in a tough situation. So it's like, I think we need to get smarter. We need to get wiser, rather, about what exactly this existence is, so that we could kind of avoid going down those slippery slopes, even if we think that it's for a virtuous reason, you know?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, we're our worst enemy. Our worst enemy. We normally sabotage ourselves or our own bullshit, whatever that may be it torturing someone or just being a dick.
Yeah. And in both
but
directions too, right? Like, not just in the direction of order, but also in the direction of chaos. Like the people today who are, you know, perpetuating, I think, kind of harmful things towards a lot of younger people as far as what is considered to be the good. You know, like, be free, do whatever the fuck you want, no responsibilities. You know, that's like Pinocchio living on that island, you know, and turning into a donkey.
Right, yeah, have freedom, and you have chlamydia now. You know, so there's always got to be a balance in things. Moderation, I think, is the best word for it. But in regards to your question about the spooky internet YouTube stuff, I've seen a lot of awful stuff. I mean, I first went on 4chan like in the 2000s, so like I've seen the brutality that the internet can show us. I do have one spooky thing to tell everyone. It wasn't necessarily on YouTube, but it was back in the day on 4chan. People would have IP links to like CCTV cameras without passwords, and people would stream them, and everyone would watch it, and like they would just cycle through all these cameras. And sometimes it would just be people's yards, office buildings. Sometimes, disturbingly, baby cribs, which was a bit messed up. You would think that camera needs a password as soon as possible. But there was one that always stuck to me. A guy was streaming it. There was a thread on X, the paranormal board. And this camera was just, it looked like it was in a basement. You could just about see the room, but it was dark. It was concrete. It looked like a basement of some sorts. But in the frame of the shot of the webcam or whatever, there was just this like black mass on the ground. It looked like a black trash bag, you know. So everyone's looking at it and everyone's like, what's the deal with this weird black shape? What was scary was that this black shape started to move. It was moving and like expanding and doing all this weird shit, and then it cut out. I don't know what the deal was with that, but it's always stuck with me because it just doesn't make any sense. That's probably the spookiest thing I've seen on the internet. I've seen some awful crap, but that one was the one that like just gave me, you know, hairs standing up. It was too much. It was a bit weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there we have it, Aaron. Now you got some new potential content there. Somebody also mentioned Sonic.exe, which I'm sure you're familiar with, right, Aaron? You know Sonic.exe.
Yeah, the .exe, that one.
Yeah.
Sonic,
and there was that connection with that song, Can You Feel the Sunshine? You know that song I'm talking about from Sonic R?
I'm familiar with the whole Sonic thing, but I know like it's a popular thing.
Yeah, I had the singer of that and like the other Sonic R songs on Break the Rules several years ago. So for those who are fans of Sonic Exe and Can You Feel the Sunshine and the whole Tails doll mythology, be sure to check that out. Search for like the Sonic stream, Break the Rules. I'm sure you'll find it there. So anyway, guys, this is the end of the show. Thank you guys so much for watching. That's it. Be sure to smash that like button, smash that subscribe button, Be sure to click the bell. Again, like I've looked at the stats, not everybody has clicked the bell yet, so be sure to click that bell, and I will see you later. Next week, we should have the Ariel Pink stream coming up. Not sure yet. He's actually having a performance tomorrow, which is the reason why we had to reschedule that stream, but I look forward to that. We should have Amanda Milius coming in soon. For those who don't know, Amanda's father, John Milius, he is the guy who was portrayed, like his character was portrayed by John Goodman in the Coen Brothers movie, The Big Lebowski. You remember, like, the guy who was, like, wearing those glasses and was, like, a military veteran? But he was the guy who directed John Milius. He directed Conan the Barbarian. So this is
What? Are you
yeah.
fucking serious? That's
Wow.
crazy.
Yeah. So
That's
his,
like my favorite movie, man.
oh, hell yeah. So his daughter, I've been in contact with her, and she's going to come on BTR very soon. We just got to work out the details as far as when that happens. So if you have any questions for her father or stuff like that, and maybe she'll pass them on. Who knows? I don't know. But, yeah. And that's also going to be with Daniele Bolelli. So Daniele Bolelli also loves that movie, but he does not like Donald Trump, and he doesn't like that whole movement. But she is like a super Trump fan, you know, like she always goes to Mar-a-Lago and hangs out with him and stuff like that. So it will be a very interesting meeting of the minds there. So, and as you guys know, Break the Rules, I try to do that as much as I can. And I kind of did that today, I think, as well, bringing people who otherwise would never really have a chance to speak to each other on the same platform so that we could all mutually learn and thus get wiser. And, oh, that's right, D.R. Sir, thank you so much. He wrote the script to Francis Ford Coppola's film Apocalypse Now. There we go.
Jeez, that's a star-studded cast right there.
Absolutely. And by the way, I think, wait, is Coppola? No, somebody else is going to be doing I think it is Coppola doing a film called Metropolis. He's been working on this thing for like years and years and years. I think now it's finally getting off the ground. So it's funny, like it's very hard for a lot of these, you know, top level directors to even get funding today because nobody cares, you know, like nobody cares about things like Taxi Driver or, you know, like all of those, you know, high quality Kino movies that came out in the past. You know, the normies are over it. So, but anyway, hopefully we're going to change that as well. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. I will see you later. Be sure to become a patron on the Patreon. Once again, that's patreon.com/breaktherules. Follow all these wonderful people here. You could get links to their social media and their sites in the description. And also for everybody who is part of Discord, be sure to follow the Break the Rules Discord as well. I am posting the link in here too. And that is it, guys. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Be well, be safe.